Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new edition of Euroquestions, the bi-monthly webinar of the Jacques Delors Institute. Today, we have the pleasure to welcome from New York, Laurent Cohen-Tanuji, an international lawyer, author, and member of the board of direction of the Jacques Delors Institute. With 10 months to go to the US election and Trump on track to win the Republican nomination, his second term in office has become a real possibility. You must understand that if Europe is attacked, we will never come to help you, Donald Trump said to Ursula von der Leyen in 2020. As a reminder, the United States is the main donor to military and financial aid to Kyiv and remains the defense umbrella for Europe among NATO. European officials also fear that Trump's return to power could rekindle trade tension between the EU and the US. So could America really leave NATO as Donald Trump regularly threatens? How the Atlantic states such as the Baltic States and those in Central Europe is preparing for an eventuality without NATO for their security, and what implication of a Trump comeback for the war in Ukraine, NATO, trade policy, as well as European politics and democracy. Before handing the floor to a speaker, I would like to remind you that the Q&A tool is available at the bottom of your screen. Mr. Cohen-Tanuji, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lara. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, good. Well, good afternoon, Europe, and good morning, America. I would like to start by stressing the question mark in the title of my talk, Trump, the return question mark, implications for Europe. Because while a Trump return is now a real possibility, it is by no means certain. We are still very early in the campaign, in a very unusual campaign, and a lot of things can happen between now and the Republican nomination, and between the nominations and the actual election in November. So we can go back to that in the Q&A if you like, but I would like to preface the talk by saying I'm not saying that Trump will be reelected, and certainly I hope he won't. So still, we're going to assess what a Trump 2 would mean for Europe. It is Europe's worst nightmare right now. One key characteristic of Donald Trump is his unpredictability, which is an evil in itself, of course. But this time, the consensus is that a second Trump term would be more radical, more revengeful than the first. It would be worse than the first, if only because the various moderators that were around him in the White House and in Congress during his first term, McCain, Cheney, Romney, and others, are gone, and the people who would be around him this time, or next time, would be total devotees to the man. So we have to assume that he would do what he said, and that's what we're going to take for granted for the purpose of this talk. So very briefly, I will go over the key consequences for Europe of Trump's re-election. I wouldn't say by order of importance, but maybe by order of immediacy. The first area is, of course, security and defense. Ukraine first. Trump said he would stop US support to Ukraine in order to force a settlement with Russia to Putin's advantage, or even worse, a total Russian victory. That would be, of course, terrible for Ukraine, but that would also be a blow to the West and to Europe in particular, and that would threaten European security because Putin would be emboldened to actually encroach and go beyond Ukraine. All the more so because the second threat is for the US to leave NATO. That's what Trump has already announced. there is hopefully some skepticism in the US on this threat. And there is even a congressional reaction. A law has been passed to try to require a supermajority in the Senate for such a withdrawal. Right now, the Constitution requires Senate approval to sign a treaty, even not to withdraw from it. So there will be a legal battle, but hopefully we wouldn't have to go to that. But if that were to happen, of course, a possible attack by Russia on a NATO country, one of the Baltic states, for example, without US intervention would be extremely threatening. But even without that, the faith in US intervention or the US participation in collective security in Europe would be severely damaged. So that's extremely concerning. The second chapter is trade. Trump has announced a 10% across the board duty on all imports into the US to be implemented immediately. We can certainly expect trade wars with the EU, and even more so with China, where I think Trump would want to go from de-risking to straight decoupling of the US economy with the Chinese economy, and that, of course, would also have consequences, repercussions on the European economy. The third area is what I would call global issues, foreign policy. Climate, of course, we could expect a second withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, and certainly a slowdown in, if not more, of the US commitment, even though a number of things have already into place, and the IRA legislation is actually good for the US, so that may stay. On foreign policy, in the Middle East, we can expect support to Netanyahu if he's still around at the time. Possibly escalation with Iran. Trump is already criticizing Biden for his response, which is supposed to happen actually pretty soon, on the killings of American soldiers in Jordan a few days ago. Again, cozying up to Saudi Arabia. On China, Taiwan may be, if Russia was emboldened in Ukraine, we could fear that China would do the same on Taiwan, and then there will be further escalation. So there's this contradiction, of course, between new isolationism, but also the risk of further conflicts with China and in the Middle East. And then undermining, as he did in the first term, the so-called international rule-based order, weakening international organizations and so on, including the EU, of course. And lastly, but maybe not least, the fourth area would be democracy itself. Not only American democracy would be turned into a populist regime run by an autocrat, and again with fear that the checks and balances that did manage to soften the first term may not work as well in a second term. But that a Trump re-election will no doubt embolden autocracy, populism, and extremism worldwide, because Trump would again continue to flirt with the various autocrats around the world, but also in Europe as well. So 2024 could be worse than 2016, which had Brexit and Trump won. If we had a anti-European majority at the June European elections, and a Trump 2 in November. So let's hope not, but that's what threatens us right now. So to conclude, what can the Europeans do in these circumstances? Certainly not sitting and waiting. The first priority, I think, is to boost defense and security and defense capability. That's obviously a long-term project, but it has started, but it has to start. It has to continue and go faster. I'm talking here about a common armament policy. I mean, the investments are there. They could be increased, but the key is to coordinate armament policies, industrial policies in the defense sector among member states, avoid duplication, and boost that. The second priority is Ukraine. Boost support, European support to Ukraine to counter Russia in the event of a Trump re-election. 3, strengthen ties with other democratic partners. The UK, of course, Canada, Japan, Australia, to try to compensate, correct the potential withdrawal of the US from NATO, in which I do not really believe seriously. And 4th, in anticipation of an election, try to prevent the disunity among European member states that we have witnessed to some extent during the first Trump term, and so sort of anticipate and try to have a common position in that event. Of course, there will be some exceptions. Thinking of Mr. Orban in particular, but try for the rest to have a common position. And I think all this is necessary, even if Trump is hopefully defeated, because Joe Biden is really the last of the Atlanticist Mohicans, if I can say so. And he's probably the most pro-European, or at least Atlanticist presidents we will have in a long time. And so all these things would be helpful for Europe to do, whatever the election results in the US are in November. I guess I'll stop here to leave enough time for questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to you for your analysis and your presentation. Maybe a first question, you mentioned it a bit in the introduction of your presentation. From a European point of view, it's hard to understand how American democracy have so weakened its institutional check and balance under Trump, and how so my question would be how American society is reacting to this.
Well, I would say right now it's a very unusual election because you've got two. I mean, Trump is considered as a former president, so he's a quasi-incumbent. So you have like two incumbents and two men who are quite old. I mean, Trump is slightly younger than Biden and probably maybe in better physical shape, but they're both two very old men. And so the American public generally is not happy about that. I think that's I mean, of course, there are the Trump adorators, but generally, I think most of the American society would prefer to have other choices. First of all, not a repeat of the 2020 election, but also other candidates, younger. But it's not happening because Trump has we've seen in the first primaries that Trump has a complete grip on the Republican Party. And on the Democratic side, as long as the president is running and is seen as being the only one capable of defeating Trump, that's going to be the election unless something happens, obviously, on either side. I wouldn't necessarily agree that checks and balances are not working. What the real change is that Trump has been able to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, so we have a super conservative majority at the Supreme Court. But that's part of the system. It's unfortunate, but that's not a change in the system. The electoral system is also what it's always been. I think it's creating more and more problems because, again, if Trump were to be elected, it would probably be by a few 10,000 voters in a few swing states against the popular vote, the actual majority of the American people. So, but that's also part of the system. So that's the situation we've got now. But I think American democracy is still the strongest in its ability to counter autocracy. But the problem is really the political situation, the polarization, and the evolution of the Republican Party.
Thank you. Maybe a second question on the Middle East. So you mentioned it a bit in your presentation, but in the first Trump term, there were a strong interest between Netanyahu and the Saudis. But the question is, it's not the case anymore after the attack on October 7th in Israel and at Gaza. So what do you think that Trump's politics in the Middle East would be after this terrorist attack?
Well, I wouldn't say that there's no longer an interest on either side. I think that the Saudis are sort of waiting for things to calm down, but I don't think they've expressed any. I think they would still be interested in normalization with Israel, and certainly the Israelis also. So I think it's more sort of on hold right now. So I think the policy would continue. And it's probably one of the best things Trump has done, or the only good thing that he's done, the Abraham Accords with some Gulf countries and Morocco and others. So I think this would continue. It would probably continue under Biden as well, as soon as things calm down in the region. And I think a successor government to Netanyahu would probably also want to continue this policy.
Thank you. Maybe another question, this time more on the European side. How can the European country prepare for a potential trade dispute with the US? We've seen with the IRA legislation that there was already misunderstanding sometimes on trade. So how can they prepare even with a second Trump mandate?
Well, the complication is that usually Trump would sort of try to divide the Europeans, have selected trade wars with in areas that are of different interest for different member states. So the key thing is, again, is sort of try to preserve unity within the EU on that. And then, the Commission has some tools to retaliate against U.S. interests. That's the only thing that would work with Trump, is to retaliate and to finally come to some kind of agreement.
Thank you. Another question, always on the European side, with the expectation that the European Parliament could be more switched to the right or far right after the European election. Can we expect a Trump administration interfering more in Europe on the rise of more right movement?
Well, they've done that. They've done that during the first term, trying to interfere, influence. So I think they would do the same. And even now, I mean, the U.S. you've seen, but Trump is interfering, even if he's not elected, he's interfering in the position that the Republican Party is taking on immigration. There was a compromise between the Democrats and the Republicans on an immigration bill, and then Trump started interfering. So we could expect that he would, if he has time, with all his legal worries, but certainly people around him might try to influence. And there are ties with extreme right parties around Europe. That these ties are still there.
And you mentioned in your presentation climate. The European Union is trying to push for a Green Deal agenda, and the Biden administration nowadays is also more keen on green policy. But with the Trump coming back on a second term, it would be, I guess, a huge disaster for climate. Will you agree with that?
Well, first of all, Europe has its own issues with climate transition, as we are seeing on the French roads these days, and in Germany as well. But no, I think the notion here is that certain things have already been done on climate, and there's also a number of actors. There's the states, there's cities, there's companies. So it's like the White House doesn't have complete control and power over what's happening on climate. I think there'll be the same sort of climate skepticism and potentially a withdrawal of the Paris Agreement again. But I think the train has kind of left the station, and so Trump too would probably have less of a damaging impact on climate. I mean, of course, if the U.S. did not comply, that would obviously influence other big emitters to do the same, China in particular. So, of course, it would have a negative effect. Whether it would be as bad as the first term, probably not.
Thank you. Coming back to trade, there is a second question. Would you agree that blocking the Mercosur agreement is not a smart way to prepare for a trade conflict with the US?
Yeah, well, I'm not a trade expert, but right now I think that Europe has to deal with its own opposition, its own internal, and prepare for the European elections before preparing for Trump, I guess. And so that's part of European politics, and we have to sort of take one issue at a time.
Thank you. Another question that you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation is security. So in the eventuality that the US withdraw from NATO, I mean, the European Union and their member states only have a few months to prepare. They're trying to have their industrial policy more keen on military. But do you think that it's realistic to say that they only have 10 months and then they would be out of any NATO security umbrella anymore?
No, I mean, first of all, the industrial effort will take years, not months, because it's really industrial program, military program take years. But I also don't think that, as I mentioned, I don't think that NATO withdrawal will be an easy thing to do, even in the US. There will be legal battle, there'll be political battles. So I think it will not happen overnight, if it happens at all. The problem is more the lack of faith in the American commitment to security, and that in itself, even without NATO withdrawal, would be very, very damaging. So the immediate issue is Ukraine. There, I think Europe can do more already now to support Ukraine and to make sure that if Trump were elected in November, there'll be immediately some reinforcement from a possible American withdrawal, which is also a problem now. I mean, the issue of Ukraine is debated today, so it's not going to go away. So Europe, in any event, has to boost its support to Ukraine today.
But that's true that it's already a moment of division within the US politics. Should they keep supporting Ukraine or not? And even in Europe, it's another concept of division. So do you think that in the coming of a European election and then the US election, I mean, we wouldn't know how the war will switch between these two elections. So how can the pro-democracy in Europe get prepared for any eventuality that maybe Trump won't be reelected after all, but then it would still mean that Europe, as you mentioned, need to be more keen on helping Ukraine.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what is your question exactly?
It was more about how can they, since even in the US they are divided with the, I think it's the chambers that didn't vote for the new budget on Ukraine. So even though there is no, I mean, in a chance that Trump won't be elected to a second term in November, how can Europe really be more keen on helping Ukraine without the fear of a Trump second term?
Well, I think there has to be more, more money, more weapons, more political support for Ukraine that's taken place until now. I think there's more things have been promised and not yet delivered. I mean, I'm not a military expert, but it's clear that Europe can do more and should do more in the. But I think that the situation would be vastly different if Trump is elected or if Biden is elected, because if Biden is reelected, I think the American support will continue. But Europe should just not wait for that. It needs to boost its support already now. Also, because time is of the essence for the Ukrainians.
Yeah, no, definitely. So maybe one last question. You mentioned at the end of your presentation, so Joe Biden, he's one of the last pro-European
Mohicans.
Yeah, Americans. So could we fear that even though there's going to be new Democrats president at the US level, they would be less keen to be pro-European?
Well, it's a matter of culture. I mean, Biden is from that generation of Atlanticists, World War II, that really built the world order as we've seen it, and had this very strong belief in transatlantic relations. I think that's changing with new generation. We saw it with Obama already, who was less familiar or interested in Europe, the pivot to Asia and all that. Ukraine has, of course, now brought back the US into Europe, but we have to assume that there's an effort to be made by the Europeans, not only to sort of strengthen themselves and become a true equal partner in the transatlantic relationship, but also in the US. I think it's important for Europeans in particular to try to educate the new American elites to the importance of Europe and of the transatlantic relationship. I'm a member of the board also of the Institut Jean Monnet, which also has in one of its missions to try to, in the US, build and educate the new generations to the importance of Europe and the transatlantic relationship. And I think it's more and more important in a world where the West in general has diminished power, diminished demographics, obviously, diminished economic power, and so we need to reinforce our ties to defend democracy, which is attacked, as you know, by all places around us, and our values. And so for that, the transatlantic relationship is absolutely critical.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Cohen-Tanuji, for your presentation and all this analysis. And thank you all for following today's Euroquestion. We will send the replay to you this afternoon. Our next session will be held on Wednesday, 40th February, and we will be welcoming Karin Thalberg, researcher in European energy policy at the Jacques Delors Energy Center. She will present her upcoming publication on the European Green Deal in the face of rising radical wing populism. Thanks again, and thank you again, Mr. Laurent Tanuji, for your presentation. Say hi to New York for us.
Okay, thank you, Lara. Thank you all for listening. Okay, have a good day.